You see, when we talk about silence, we often reduce it to nothingness, a void, a pause, maybe even an escape. But in reality, silence is rarely ever empty. In fact, silence can be the loudest form of communication. It carries emotional gravity. It weighs on the heart. It lingers in the mind. And the longer it stretches, the heavier it becomes. Not just for you, but especially for her. You may think you're doing nothing by staying silent, but understand this: your silence is doing the speaking for you. It's saying things that words would never articulate with the same sharpness or intensity. It says, I no longer need to explain myself. I've pulled back. You're no longer in control of my attention. And that message, delivered without a sound, pierces much deeper than any outburst or long-winded monologue ever could. Human beings are wired to interpret silence. Psychologists call it implicit communication. The absence of dialogue forces the mind to search for meaning. It becomes a mirror, one that doesn't lie. And for someone who is used to your presence, your availability, your energy, the moment you remove that input, her mind starts to spiral. She feels that absence not just emotionally, but physiologically. The nervous system reacts. Dopamine withdrawal kicks in. She becomes hyper-aware of the silence. It becomes unbearable. Let me put it like this: when you were constantly texting, calling, showing up, she could lean on the comfort of your predictability. You were a fixture in her emotional environment. But now, with your silence, you've created uncertainty. And uncertainty is more powerful than rejection. Rejection is finite. It's an answer. But silence, that's a question mark with no expiration date. That's what cuts deeper. That's what keeps her up at night. Think about it. Every time she reaches for her phone and sees no message from you, it hits. Every quiet moment of her day is now filled with noise. The noise of thoughts, regret, imagination, guilt, desire. She replays the last words you said, the last moment you shared. She starts asking herself questions she never bothered to ask when your presence was consistent. Did I push him away? Did I take him for granted? Was he really the one holding this together? And you never had to say a word. Your absence did all the work. But here's the key. This only works when your silence is intentional, not reactionary. You're not going silent out of spite. You're doing it from a place of clarity. You've stopped explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. That's not weakness. That's emotional intelligence. And that level of emotional detachment, calm, centered, unapologetic, hits different. It doesn't just make her miss you, it makes her question everything she thought she knew about you. And that's where the shift happens. Silence reveals value. And sometimes it's only in your absence that your true worth is finally recognized. The silence becomes a lesson, a consequence, a wake-up call. Because while she may have ignored your presence, she can't escape your silence. So don't underestimate it. Don't rush to fill the gap with desperate explanations or forced reconciliation. Let the silence work. Let it echo. Let her feel the full weight of what it means to no longer have access to you. Because the longer you stay silent, the deeper she feels it. And sometimes that's the only way real change begins. Let's get something straight. Silence isn't weakness. It isn't retreat. It isn't cowardice. It's control. And when it's rooted in self-awareness and discipline, silence becomes one of the most powerful responses you can offer in any emotional situation, especially when dealing with someone who expected you to always show up, react, explain, or chase. See, the moment you withdraw, truly withdraw, not as a tactic, but as a reflection of your internal growth, you begin to flip the script. People often misread silence as passive aggression or emotional immaturity, but that's projection. In reality, silence, when wielded intentionally, is a form of mastery. You are no longer reacting to noise. You are no longer participating in the chaos. You are no longer playing the game that she expected you to keep playing. When you step back and stop engaging, it might look like you're doing nothing. But under the surface, you're changing everything. You're reclaiming your emotional energy. You're pulling your attention away from someone who didn't value it. That's not petty. That's self-respect. When someone begins to feel your absence not because you're gone physically, but because you've stopped feeding their emotional ego, that's when the silence starts to sting. And let me tell you something important here. Not chasing is not a sign that you don't care. It's a sign that you care about yourself more than you care about preserving a connection that's become one-sided. You can care and still walk away. You can feel love and still let go. The deeper maturity lies in knowing that energy given without reciprocation is energy wasted. There's this common myth that being the bigger person means always reaching out, always initiating peace, always explaining yourself. No, sometimes being the bigger person means doing absolutely nothing, just standing still, silent, grounded in your truth. You're not abandoning anyone. You're simply removing yourself from dynamics that drain you. And the people who relied on your constant engagement, your predictable reactions, your emotional labor, they will feel that difference like a cut through the silence. People say, energy doesn't lie. That's true, but neither does the absence of energy. The moment you pull your energy back, the dynamics shift. You'll be surprised how silence can unravel egos, expose insecurities, and surface the truths that words often bury. You're not speaking, but you're saying everything. You're not replying, but your lack of reaction becomes the conversation. You're not chasing, but your stillness becomes magnetic. Now here's the catch: this only works if you are evolving during that silence. Don't just be quiet. Be building. Be becoming. The power of silence comes from what you're doing you with it. While she's wondering where you are, who you're talking to, what you're feeling. You're sharpening your vision, healing your wounds, elevating your mind. That's how the silence hits harder. That's how it becomes more than just absence. It becomes proof of growth. And that's the moment she starts to feel it. Not the silence itself, but what the silence represents. It represents the fact that you no longer need her validation, that you've broken the cycle, that your peace now costs more than her attention. And nothing hits deeper than realizing someone who once chased, once cared, once tried, has now stopped, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. So don't feel guilty for stepping back. Don't let the world convince you that detachment is cruelty. When done from a place of truth, detachment is dignity. And the longer you remain in that state, the more undeniable your power becomes. Space isn't just distance. It's a psychological event. And when you give someone space, not in bitterness, but in quiet certainty, you're inviting a rare phenomenon to take place: reflection. The kind of reflection that doesn't happen during arguments, explanations, or even when things are going well. True reflection begins in the absence of your voice, your attention, your presence. Most people don't change because of confrontation. They change because of realization. And realization requires silence. It requires stillness. It needs that vacuum, that uncomfortable emptiness where someone is forced to sit with themselves and truly feel the absence of what they once took for granted. When you stop showing up, stop initiating, stop reacting, you're no longer part of the noise that keeps them distracted. Suddenly, there's space where your energy used to be. And in that space, things begin to echo. Old words resurface. Past moments replay. Regrets, once buried under the weight of daily interaction, begin to rise to the surface. That space becomes a mirror, and she can't look away. Here's the psychology of IQ. When the brain is used to a certain stimulus, like your attention, and that stimulus disappears, the nervous system enters a subtle state of withdrawal. It's the same principle behind habit formation and addiction. Consistent exposure creates expectation. And when expectation isn't met, the mind starts searching for answers. That's what creates discomfort. That's what creates impact. You don't need to raise your voice or send a final dramatic message. You don't need to beg to be understood. You don't even need to explain what she already knows. All you have to do is step back. and let time and silence do what words never could. People underestimate how powerful it is to let someone sit in the space you once filled. It's in that silence that the real weight of your presence is finally understood. Now, you may be tempted to believe that if she's not reaching out, if she's not apologizing, if she's not visibly suffering, then the space isn't working. But growth doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like her staring at a ceiling at 2 a.m. wondering why she feels a pit in her stomach. Sometimes it looks like her scrolling through your old messages just to feel something familiar. That space, that silence, it's a slow burn. But it's real. It's doing its work. You see, your presence provided comfort even if she didn't admit it. Even if she acted indifferent. That's the trick. People often recognize the A function of your presence only once it's removed. And in that gap, they're left to ask themselves the hard questions, was I the problem? Did I lose something good? Did I misread who he really was? And here's the powerful part. You didn't say a thing. You didn't need to. The space did all the talking. So let her feel it. Not in cruelty, but in clarity. Give her the room to see herself without your emotional buffer. Don't rush to fill the silence just because you're uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable. Reflection is uncomfortable. But both are necessary, especially for someone who needs to realize what they lost. That's why silence and space are not passive, they're strategic, they're not avoidance, they're evolution. And if you use them wisely, they'll do more to reveal your value than any argument, explanation, or emotional breakdown ever could. There's a powerful shift the moment you stop trying to be understood and start prioritizing your peace. You're not ignoring her, you're choosing yourself. And that difference changes everything, because the silence you offer isn't about punishment. It's not to manipulate or provoke a reaction. It's a declaration that your energy is no longer on discount. The truth is, we often fall into this subtle pattern, where we give too much of ourselves just to keep someone emotionally engaged. We over-explain, over-communicate, overextend. And in doing so, we compromise our own standards. But the moment you recognize that peace is more valuable than validation, you begin to protect your energy like a scarce resource. That's when the silence becomes meaningful, not just to her, but to you. See, when you were available, she knew you were there. Emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically. But that familiarity can easily be mistaken for permanence. People grow numb to what they don't fear losing. So when you suddenly stop showing up, not out of revenge, but out of realignment, her system notices. Not because you vanished, but because something within you evolved. You stopped handing out access. You started holding yourself to a higher standard. That's the moment it gets real. Because now the silence isn't passive, it's confident. You're not running, you're standing still calm. Unbothered, clear. And nothing is more unsettling to someone who expected you to always be the one reaching out, fixing things, or maintaining the connection. That detachment. It speaks louder than any emotional plea ever could. But this isn't about being cold. It's about being precise. You're not cutting her off. You're cutting off the version of you that needed her to validate your worth. That's what stings the most. Not your silence, but what it represents. It represents growth. It represents emotional discipline. It represents the fact that you've stopped explaining yourself to someone who refused to listen when it mattered. People don't notice how hard you tried until you stop trying. And that's when your silence becomes the teacher. It's a mirror she can't avoid, because now she's left with her own reflection without your voice buffering the truth. She starts to replay everything. Every word, every choice, every misstep. And it hits differently when there's no emotional safety net to fall back on. This is how you reclaim your power without needing to raise your voice. You simply stop participating in your own mistreatment. You stop showing up where you're no longer seen clearly. And that absence, it speaks volumes. It says, I've outgrown this version of the story. I've outgrown needing to be misunderstood. Let me be clear, your silence should never come from anger. It should come from evolution. You're not trying to be mysterious. You're just done explaining the obvious. And when that realization sinks in for her, when she finally understands that your detachment wasn't forced but chosen, it triggers something deeper than regret. It triggers respect. Even if she never says it out loud, she'll feel it. She'll feel the gravity of a man who no longer chases validation but stands firmly in his own worth. So, don't chase, don't explain. Don't negotiate your peace for temporary comfort. Let your silence do what your words could never accomplish. One of the most underestimated forces in human psychology is the mind's ability to fill in the blanks. When there's no closure, no communication, no explanation, something fascinating happens. The brain doesn't accept silence as an answer, it starts writing its own story. And that story, more often than not, is far more brutal, vivid, and emotionally charged than anything you could have ever said out loud. That's the real power of silence. It activates imagination. It triggers overthinking. The mind, desperate for answers, begins to spiral. Questions that never mattered before suddenly feel urgent. Is he over me? Did I push him away? Is he with someone else? And the kicker, you never had to say a word. Your absence created a narrative far more impactful than any carefully crafted speech ever could. Think about this in terms of emotional exposure. When you were present, available, and communicating regularly, she felt a certain control. Even in conflict, there was a sense of predictability. You might argue, express frustration, even threaten to leave, but as long as you were talking, she knew she still had space in your mind. Your words reassured her, even when they were harsh. But when those words stop, when the calls don't come, the messages don't arrive, and your energy is no longer in orbit, she loses that control. And what replaces it is far more tormenting: uncertainty. Uncertainty is the most uncomfortable psychological space for the human mind. We are wired to resolve ambiguity. We crave resolution, even if it's painful. That's why people often prefer closure, even if it comes with heartbreak over being ghosted or left in emotional limbo. Because at least with closure, the mind knows how to move forward. But silence traps her in a loop. And every time she tries to exit that loop, her mind pulls her deeper. Now here's the part that most people miss. What fills that silence is shaped by how you carried yourself when you were present. If you were honest, consistent, loyal, and giving, then the silence cuts sharper. Because now she's not just questioning your absence. She's questioning her own actions that may have led to it. She's not just thinking about you. She's reevaluating herself in the context of what she lost. That's where the growth happens. That's where the self-awareness starts to bloom. You see, silence becomes more than just a lack of words. It becomes a psychological canvas, and what she paints on it depends entirely on what you've left behind. If you walked away with dignity, if you excited with integrity, your silence becomes a monument, not of bitterness, but of strength. It becomes something she visits in her mind often, and not because you're haunting her, but because you represented something she wasn't ready to lose. The mind hates a vacuum. It will fill it with anything it can grab. Memories, doubts, what-ifs. And every day you stay silent, every day you stay focused on your peace instead of chasing closure, the story she tells herself becomes heavier. Not because you're punishing her, but because she's finally facing what she avoided when you were always available. This is not about games. It's not about revenge. It's about understanding that your value multiplies in the absence of noise. When you stop speaking, your character becomes the only thing she can hear. And if that character was built on truth and self-respect, then your silence won't just be felt. It'll be remembered. There comes a moment when you have to stop teaching presence and start letting them learn through absence. It's a hard truth to accept, especially if you're someone who leads with heart, who tries to make things work, who believes in communication. But some lessons can't be delivered through conversation. Some people only begin to understand your value when you remove yourself from the equation completely and let the silence speak. We often think our words will save a connection, that if we just explain it better, say it louder, or choose the right moment, they'll finally see what we meant. But the truth is, people don't change because you told them to. They change when they feel the consequences of your withdrawal. And that only happens when you stop showing up, when you stop being the emotional cushion, when you stop offering comfort to someone who didn't protect the connection when they had it. This isn't about ghosting. This isn't about disappearing in anger. It's about stepping back with clarity and letting your absence deliver the message your presence could never complete. Because sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is no statement at all. Silence doesn't confuse someone who values you. It only confuses those who assumed they could have unlimited access to you without any accountability. Let her feel it. Let her sit in the space you once filled. Not out of vengeance, but out of principle. Because while you were there, invested, consistent, sincere, maybe she didn't notice the depth of what you were offering. Maybe she thought you'd always be available, that she could pull you back in with a message, a memory, or a moment of vulnerability. But now your silence is the response. Now the unanswered message A is the reply. Now the lack of reaction O is the boundary. Here's what happens next. She starts thinking. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly. At first it's curiosity, then discomfort, then regret. She begins to reflect not just on what was said, but what was left unsaid. That's when the silence starts to sink in. That's when the lessons you try to teach through presence finally begin to take root. But for that to happen, you have to stay silent long enough for the discomfort to reach her. You can't check in. You can't leave the door halfway open. Emotional detachment only works when it's real, when it's complete, when you're no longer hoping for a reaction, but instead focused on becoming someone who no longer needs one. Because here's the truth. If she's meant to understand, she will. In the silence, in the space, in the late night thoughts that replace your consistent presence, she'll remember the way you listened, the way you supported, the way you stayed, even when you had reasons to walk away. And then she'll realize you're no longer there, and that realization, it won't just sting, it will change her. You don't owe anyone endless chances to misunderstand your worth. You don't owe anyone the comfort of your presence when they fail to value it. Sometimes, the most respectful thing you can do for both of you is to step away and let the silence become the teacher. Let the weight of what she lost settle in, not because you forced it, but because you no longer protected her from it.